The silence after his question felt heavier than the storm outside. Nobody answered him immediately. One of the men near the wall glanced toward the half-open security door behind me, his jaw tightening slightly, like he already knew someone was going to lose their job over this. I could not breathe properly. My lungs worked in short, painful pulls while every survival instinct in my body screamed at me to apologize and run. But my legs would not move. The man with the pale blue eyes kept watching me, calmly, like he was trying to solve a puzzle instead of deciding what to do with a terrified nurse standing in the wrong place at the worst possible time. Then he started walking toward me. Slow, controlled. The sound of his shoes against the carpet barely existed, but somehow every step landed directly against my nerves. Up close, he looked even more dangerous. Not because he was loud or aggressive, because he was not. Men who knew they had power never needed to prove it. His charcoal coat hung perfectly across broad shoulders. A silver watch glinted beneath the cuff of his sleeve. There was a faint scar near the edge of his jawline that somehow made his face look colder instead of rougher. He stopped less than 3 feet away from me. I hated how tall he was. Hated that I had to tilt my head slightly to meet his eyes. "You work here," he said finally. Not a question. I swallowed hard. "Why, yes." His gaze dropped briefly to my hospital badge clipped against my navy scrubs. Claire Bennett, pediatric nurse. He read it silently before looking back at me again. Claire. The way he said my name made my stomach tighten. Soft. Precise. Like he intended to remember it. One of the suited men stepped closer. "Sir." She did not see anything important. The man beside me did not even look at him. That was not the question. His voice stayed perfectly level. Somehow that made everyone else more nervous. I noticed it immediately. The men around him watched him carefully. Respectfully, like one wrong word from him could change the temperature of the entire room. He turned back toward me. "Why did you come down this hallway?" "I heard something," I admitted before I could stop. "Myself. I thought maybe someone needed help." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, more like surprise. One corner of his mouth moved almost invisibly before disappearing again. "You walked into a restricted corridor at nearly 3 in the morning because you thought somebody might need help?" I nodded once. Embarrassment burned across my face immediately afterward. Hearing it out loud made me sound stupid. Reckless. I know it was not my business. "No," he said quietly. It was not. Rain flashed silver against the tall windows behind him. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled across Manhattan. I became painfully aware of the coffee soaking into the carpet near my feet, of my pulse hammering inside my throat, of the fact that none of these men looked remotely surprised to see private security inside a hospital after midnight. The man studied me for another long second before holding out his hand. "Phone." I blinked. "What?" "Your phone, Claire." Fear climbed my spine instantly. "I did not take pictures." "I know." He waited patiently anyway. My fingers shook as I reached into my scrub pocket and handed it over. He glanced at the screen briefly before passing it to the man behind him without even looking away from me. "You can give that back later," he said. Later. The word hit me strangely, like he had already decided I was not leaving anytime soon. "I really should get back upstairs," I said carefully. "My patient. Someone else will cover your floor." My heartbeat stumbled. "Excuse me." He stepped slightly closer. Not enough to touch me. Just enough for me to catch the scent of cedar and expensive cologne beneath the clean hospital air. "Claire," he said softly, "the moment you entered this corridor, your nights stopped belonging to you." The elevator ride down felt endless. Nobody spoke. One of the men stood beside me with my phone still in his hand, while another remained directly behind us, silent as a shadow. I stared at the glowing floor numbers above the doors and tried not to panic. 23 floors. 23 chances for this night to become a nightmare I would never wake up from. Damien Moretti stood near the back corner of the elevator with one hand resting loosely against the silver cane. He barely moved during the descent. Calm, unreadable, like controlling entire rooms was as natural to him as breathing. The private garage beneath Mercy Heights smelled faintly of rain and expensive leather. Black SUVs lined the polished concrete floor beneath rows of white overhead lights. Every vehicle looked identical. Clean. Untouched. Dangerous. A cold breeze slipped through the open entrance ramp leading toward the storm outside. I wrapped my arms around myself instinctively. My scrub top suddenly felt too thin. I need to call my supervisor, I said carefully as we crossed the garage. If I disappear in the middle of my shift, people will notice. Already handled, Damien replied without slowing down. I stopped walking. What does that mean? He turned slightly toward me. It means your supervisor believes you experienced a migraine and went home early. My stomach dropped. You cannot just do that. I already did. The calmness in his voice made frustration spark through my fear for the first time that night. You do not get to control my life because I walked down the wrong hallway. One of the men near the SUV shifted slightly, like he expected Damien to react badly. Instead, Damien looked at me for a long moment before opening the rear passenger door himself. Rain hammered the pavement outside the garage entrance, silver beneath the streetlights. Get in the car, Claire. No. The word escaped before I could rethink it. Silence followed immediately afterward. My pulse jumped painfully inside my throat. Nobody around us moved. Damien did not look angry. Somehow that was worse. He stepped closer slowly, stopping just short of my personal space. Do you know what happens to witnesses in this city? He asked quietly. I am not a witness. You entered a restricted floor owned by men who erase problems professionally. The rain grew louder outside. I could hear tires hissing against wet pavement somewhere above us. Damien lowered his voice slightly. You saw faces tonight. That alone is enough. Fear crawled back through me instantly. I hated that part of me believed. Him. Hated that another part already understood he was trying to keep me calm instead of threatening me. I just want to go home, I whispered. Something unreadable flickered behind his pale eyes, then disappeared. Tiredness maybe. Or guilt. Home is the first place they will look. He nodded once toward the SUV. You stay somewhere secure tonight. Tomorrow, we discuss options. We? Yes. The way he said it made my chest tighten again. Like my future had somehow become connected to his without my permission. A flash of lightning illuminated the garage entrance behind him, outlining the sharp lines of his face in silver for half a second. Beautiful and terrifying at the same time. I hated that combination. One of the guards handed Damien my phone. Damien glanced down at the screen briefly before holding it out toward me. Your mother called twice. I blinked in surprise. What? You labeled her as emergency contact. His expression remained calm. I did not answer. Relief hit me harder than expected. My fingers brushed his accidentally as I took the phone back. Warm skin. Steady hands. His gaze dropped briefly toward the small contact before returning to my face again. Something shifted in the air between us. Tiny. Dangerous. Then headlights swept suddenly across the garage wall behind me. Every suited man reacted instantly. Damien grabbed my wrist before I even understood what was happening. Firm. Controlled. Protective. Inside the car, he said quietly. This time, nobody argued. The door shut behind me with a heavy sound that felt far too final. Warm air wrapped around my freezing skin as the black SUV pulled away from the hospital garage and disappeared into the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan. I sat rigidly against the leather seat, my hands clenched tightly around my phone while city lights blurred across the tinted windows beside me. Nobody spoke for the first 5 minutes. Damien sat across from me in the facing seat, one arm resting loosely against the dark leather beside him while the soft glow from passing streetlights cut across his face in shifting silver patterns. Calm. Untouched, like chaos simply moved around him instead of reaching him. I hated how aware I was of him. The expensive watch beneath his sleeve, the faint scar near his jaw, the way every man inside the vehicle watched the road like they expected danger at every intersection. Finally, I could not take the silence anymore. Where are you taking me? Damien looked up from the phone in his hand. Somewhere secure. That is not an answer. It is the only one you are getting tonight. Frustration tightened painfully in my chest. You keep talking like I am in danger, but you still have not explained what is actually happening. His eyes settled on me steadily. That is because the less you know, the safer you remain. I laughed softly before I could stop myself. Tired. Bitter. You kidnapped a nurse after her shift, and somehow that is supposed to make me feel safer? One of the men near the front glanced backward briefly. Damien barely reacted. If I intended to harm you, Claire, this conversation would be very different. The terrifying thing was that I believed him. Rain streaked down the windows outside while the city slowly changed around us. Bright storefronts disappeared. Traffic thinned. Steel skyscrapers gave way to quieter streets lined with old brick buildings and glowing penthouse towers overlooking the river. My pulse slowed slightly as exhaustion finally began crashing through me in heavy waves. I had been awake nearly 20 hours. Fear only carried a body so far before fatigue started winning. The SUV turned beneath a private underground entrance guarded by steel gates and armed security. My stomach tightened all over again. The vehicle rolled to a smooth stop inside a marble parking structure, so clean it barely looked real. One of the guards stepped out immediately and opened my door. Cold air brushed against my face as I climbed out slowly, staring upward at the towering glass building above us. "You live here?" I asked quietly. Damien stepped beside me. "Sometimes." That answer somehow told me everything. Inside, the elevator required fingerprint access. The walls were black marble veined with silver, while soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers overhead. Rich people always tried making power look elegant. Damien stood beside me silently while the elevator climbed higher and higher above Manhattan. 30 floors. 40. 50. My ears popped slightly before the doors finally opened into a private penthouse wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows and warm amber light. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Rain shimmered across rooftops and bridges beneath the dark sky. It was beautiful in the coldest possible way. I stepped inside slowly. The apartment smelled faintly like cedarwood and expensive coffee. Everything looked untouched. Perfect. Like nobody actually lived here long enough to make it human. Damien removed his coat calmly and draped it across the back of a chair. "There are clothes in the guest room. Someone will bring food shortly." I stared at him. "You really expect me to sleep here?" "Yes." "And if I leave?" For the first time all night, his expression hardened slightly. Not anger. Something quieter. More dangerous. "You will not make it 3 blocks before somebody starts asking why Damien Moretti suddenly misplaced a witness." Silence settled heavily between us. Rain tapped softly against the enormous windows overlooking Manhattan while my heartbeat echoed inside my ribs. Damien loosened the cuff of his sleeve slowly without looking away from me. "You are not my prisoner, Claire." My throat tightened instantly because somehow those words sounded far less comforting than they should have. "Then what am I?" His pale blue eyes held mine across the dim penthouse light. "That," he said quietly, "is what I am trying to figure out." I did not sleep. I tried. Around 4 in the morning, I sat on the edge of the enormous guest bed wearing borrowed sweatpants and a gray t-shirt that still smelled faintly like expensive detergent and cedarwood, staring out at the rain sliding down 50-story windows while Manhattan glowed beneath the storm like another universe entirely. The room itself was bigger than my entire apartment in Queens. Soft lighting hidden behind dark wooden panels. Marble bathroom counters that looked untouched. Thick cream-colored blankets folded perfectly across the bed like somebody had arranged them for a magazine shoot instead of a real human being. Nothing about Damien Moretti's world felt accidental. Even the silence seemed carefully controlled. I rubbed tired hands across my face and checked my phone again. 3 missed texts from my mother. One from my coworker Jenna asking if I was feeling better after the migraine. I stared at that message for a long moment. Somebody had lied smoothly enough to make an entire hospital believe I had simply gone home sick. That realization unsettled me more than the armed guards downstairs. I finally stood and stepped quietly into the hallway. The penthouse remained dim except for warm light spilling from somewhere near the kitchen. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the windows, silver and gold against the dark sky. I followed the light carefully. Damien stood alone, near the counter, wearing a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. No jacket. No cane this time. Just the city lights reflecting faintly across pale blue eyes while he poured coffee into a ceramic mug. Somehow that looked even more dangerous. Humans suited him less than power did. He glanced toward me without surprise. "You should be sleeping. I could say the same thing to you." A faint shadow of amusement crossed his face before disappearing. "Coffee." I hesitated before nodding once. He handed me a mug without speaking further. His fingers brushed mine briefly again. Warm. Steady. My pulse betrayed me instantly. I hated that too. We stood in silence for a moment while rain tapped softly against the glass walls surrounding the penthouse. The coffee tasted better than anything I could normally afford. Of course it did. "You really own this entire building?" I asked quietly. Part of it. That is an insane answer. Another tiny, almost smile touched the corner of his mouth. It vanished before I fully believed it happened. I leaned against the marble counter carefully. Can I ask you something? You are going to anyway. Why was everybody so afraid downstairs tonight? The question lingered between us. Damien looked out toward the sleeping city instead of answering immediately. Fear keeps people predictable. That sounds lonely. His eyes shifted. Back toward me slowly. Something unreadable passed through his expression, then disappeared beneath control again. Loneliness is useful in my world. I frowned slightly. That is a depressing thing to say at 4 in the morning. Silence followed. Not awkward exactly. Heavy. Thoughtful. Then Damien reached for something on the kitchen counter beside him. A small inhaler. His movements remained calm, but I noticed the tightness near his eyes immediately. Nurse instincts never really turned off. You are injured. I am fine. That was not what I said. He looked mildly irritated for the first time since I met him. Claire, you are favoring your right side every time you move. I set my coffee down carefully. And your breathing changed the second you thought I was not paying attention. His jaw tightened slightly. You noticed too much. Occupational hazard. For one long second, we simply looked at each other beneath the dim kitchen lights, while thunder rolled softly outside. Then Damien surprised me completely. He unbuttoned the cuff of his sleeve and rolled it back further without a word. A white bandage wrapped around his forearm beneath the dark fabric. Clean. Precise. Recently changed. Satisfied? He asked quietly. I stared at the bandage. Then back at him. No, I admitted softly. Actually, now I have more questions. Damien stared at me across the kitchen island for a long second before rolling his sleeve back down slowly. The motion looked controlled, but I caught the slight tightening around his mouth when the fabric brushed the bandage underneath. Pain. He was hiding pain. You should not have moved your arm that much, I said quietly. You say that like I have a choice. Everybody has a choice. Something dark flickered briefly behind his eyes. That is a luxury where you come from, Claire. The words settled heavily between us. I looked down into my coffee cup, watching steam curl into the dim penthouse light while Manhattan glittered outside the windows behind him. Maybe he was right. My life was exhausting. Bills. Double shifts. Subway delays. Burnout. But at least my choices belonged to me. Damien Moretti lived inside a different kind of cage. Entirely. I hated realizing that. A sharp buzzing sound suddenly broke the silence. Damien pulled a phone from his pocket and glanced at the screen. His expression changed instantly. Not dramatic. Just colder. More focused. What happened? He asked quietly. Whoever spoke on the other end talked fast enough that even I could hear the urgency through the speaker. Damien listened without interrupting, pale eyes drifting briefly toward me. My stomach tightened immediately. No, he said finally. Nobody moves until I arrive. The call ended. Silence rushed back into the room. What is wrong? I asked carefully. Damien slid the phone back into his pocket. You were followed leaving the hospital. Every muscle in my body locked instantly. What? Another vehicle entered the garage 30 seconds after ours. He reached for his coat draped over the chair nearby. My security team intercepted them downtown. My chest tightened painfully. Intercepted? Relax. His voice stayed calm. Nobody was harmed. I should have felt relieved. Instead, fear crawled colder through me than before because the situation suddenly felt real in a way it had not an hour ago. Somebody had actually followed us. Somebody knew I existed now. Damien buttoned his coat slowly before looking back toward me. You are staying here today. Absolutely not. He paused. Claire, I have work tonight. No, you do not. Frustration flared instantly through my exhaustion. You do not get to decide that for me. Actually, right now, I do. I stepped back from the counter. This is insane. This is temporary. You keep saying that like it magically makes any of this normal. Damien crossed the kitchen slowly, stopping directly in front of me. Too close. Not touching. Just close enough that the heat from him wrapped through the cool air between us. Listen carefully, he said quietly. The men who followed us do not care that you are a nurse. They do not care that you walked into the wrong corridor by accident. They care that you saw faces connected to me. My pulse hammered painfully inside my throat. Why? For the first time since meeting him, Damien looked tired. Not physically. Something deeper than that. Because fear keeps powerful people alive. The city lights reflected faintly across his pale blue eyes while thunder rolled softly outside. I realized suddenly that Damien was not trying to scare me anymore. He was trying to prepare me. Somehow that terrified me more. A soft knock interrupted the moment. One of the guards stepped into the penthouse carefully. "Sir." Damien turned slightly. "What?" "There is a child downstairs asking for you." Confusion flickered briefly across Damien's face. "A child?" The guard nodded once. "Little girl. About 8 years old. Says her mother works in the building laundry room. She refuses to leave until she speaks to you." Something shifted in Damien immediately. The coldness disappeared from his posture so quickly I almost thought I imagined it. He looked back toward me once before heading for the elevator. "Stay here." "Damien, please." The word stopped me cold. Quiet. Exhausted. Human. He disappeared down the hallway before I could answer, leaving me alone beneath the soft penthouse lights while rain tapped gently against the glass walls surrounding the city. 10 minutes later, curiosity won again. I stepped carefully toward the private elevator overlooking the lower lobby through an open balcony rail. And for the first time since meeting Damien Moretti, I saw something nobody at Mercy Heights would have believed. The most feared man in the room kneeling beside a crying little girl, patiently tying the loose ribbon on her pink winter coat. I stayed hidden near the upstairs balcony longer than I should have. The marble railing felt cold beneath my hands while I watched Damien kneel in the lobby below, speaking softly to the little girl whose pink coat looked painfully small against all the black suits surrounding her. One of his guards handed her a cup of hot chocolate, while Damien adjusted the scarf around her neck with careful fingers that did not match the man I met in that hospital corridor. The contrast unsettled me more than anything else so far. Monsters were easier when they looked like monsters all the time. Nearly 20 minutes passed before Damien returned upstairs. I stepped away from the balcony. Immediately, pretending I had not been watching. The private elevator door slid open behind me with a soft chime. "You should not sneak around in other people's homes," he said calmly. I turned too fast. "You should not sneak nurses out of hospitals in the middle of the night." One corner of his mouth shifted faintly. "Fair point." He removed his coat slowly and draped it over the chair again. Rain still tapped gently against the windows surrounding the penthouse, softer now than before. Dawn had started creeping faintly across the Manhattan skyline, turning the clouds pale gray above the river. I folded my arms tightly. Who was the little girl? Damien loosened the cuffs of his sleeves. "Her mother works in one of my buildings." "She came here alone?" "Her mother was taken to the emergency room tonight." My chest tightened immediately. "What happened?" "Exhaustion." He glanced briefly toward me. 3 jobs. Double shifts. Collapsed during work." The familiarity of those words hit harder than they should have. I knew women like that. I worked beside women like that every day. Damien moved toward the kitchen and poured himself another cup of coffee. "The child was frightened," he added quietly. "She thought her mother would lose her job. And she will not." I stared at him carefully. "You paid the hospital bill." He took a slow sip of coffee instead of answering directly, which was answer enough. Silence settled between us again, but this time it felt different, less sharp around the edges. I hated noticing that too. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand. Unknown number. Every nerve in my body tightened instantly. Damien noticed the change in my face immediately. "Who is it?" "I do not know." "Answer it." "Absolutely not." "Claire." His tone remained calm, but something underneath it sharpened slightly. Reluctantly, I accepted the call and lifted the phone toward my ear. Static crackled softly through the speaker for one long second. Then a male voice spoke quietly. "Wrong place. Wrong night." My blood turned ice cold. The call disconnected immediately afterward. I froze completely. Damien crossed the room before I even lowered the phone. "What did he say?" I could barely breathe properly. He said, my voice shook. "Wrong place. Wrong night." The temperature in the penthouse seemed to drop instantly. Damien took the phone carefully from my hand and checked the number. His jaw tightened slightly for the first time since I met him. "How did they get this number?" One of the guards asked sharply from near the elevator. Damien looked furious now. Not loud fury. Worse. Controlled fury. The kind that made everyone around him quieter. He handed the phone back to me carefully. "You are not leaving this building." "Damien." No, his pale blue eyes locked onto mine. "Listen to me carefully." Every instinct inside me screamed that something had just changed permanently. Damien stepped closer, lowering his voice. Last night, you were a witness. My pulse hammered painfully against my ribs. And now, he held my terrified gaze steadily while dawn light slowly filled the penthouse around us. Now they are trying to scare you. Fear wrapped tightly around my lungs. It is working. Something flickered across his expression then. Brief. Dangerous. Protective. That, Damien said quietly, is exactly why they just made a mistake. The penthouse felt smaller after the phone call. Not physically. Emotionally. Like the walls had moved closer while I was not looking. I sat near the massive living room windows wrapped in a cream-colored blanket someone had silently placed beside me an hour earlier, watching rain crawl slowly down the glass, while the city woke beneath storm clouds and gray morning light. Somewhere below us, Manhattan traffic had started humming again. Normal people heading to normal jobs. Coffee carts opening. Subway platforms filling. Meanwhile, I was trapped inside a billionaire mafia boss's penthouse, trying not to panic every time my phone vibrated. Damien had disappeared into another room nearly 20 minutes earlier with 3 of his men. Their voices stayed low enough that I could not hear exact words, but tension traveled easily through silence. Especially his silence. I finally stood and wandered carefully toward the kitchen again, mostly because sitting still made my thoughts louder. The penthouse remained spotless despite the fact armed men had been moving through it since sunrise. Expensive architecture magazine perfection. Cold marble. Dark wood. Floor-to-ceiling windows. No photographs anywhere. No personal mess. Nothing soft except the piano music quietly drifting from hidden speakers overhead. A life designed for control. I spotted Damien near the far hallway speaking quietly into another phone. His posture remained calm, but exhaustion shadowed his face now beneath the pale morning light. He looked up the second he noticed me standing there. Always aware. You should eat something, he said after ending the call. I think I might throw up if I try. Something flickered briefly across his expression. Concern maybe. Fear does that. I crossed my arms tightly. You say that like you are familiar with fear. One of his guards glanced at me like I had just insulted a king directly to his face. Damien only studied me for a moment before answering. Fear keeps intelligent people alive. And what keeps people like you alive? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Silence followed immediately afterward. Damien dismissed the guards with one look. The room emptied quietly until only the 2 of us remained standing beneath the soft kitchen lights. Rain tapped against the windows again. Slower now. Gentler. Damien loosened the cuffs of his black shirt slightly before speaking. Discipline, he said quietly. Routine. Distance. I frowned. Distance from what? His pale blue eyes held mine steadily. Everyone. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. I had expected arrogance. Threats. Control. Not loneliness. Never loneliness. My chest tightened unexpectedly. That sounds exhausting. A faint shadow of amusement crossed his face. You keep saying things nobody around me says. Maybe everybody around you is afraid to be honest. His expression darkened slightly, then softened again almost immediately. That is probably true. My phone buzzed again suddenly on the marble counter between us. Both of us looked down instantly. Unknown number. My pulse spiked painfully. Damien reached for the phone first. Do not answer it. The screen lit up again before. Either of us moved further. This time it was not a call. A text message appeared instead. We know where your mother lives. Every ounce of air vanished from my lungs. No, my voice broke instantly. No, no, no. Panic crashed through me so fast my knees nearly gave out. Damien caught my arm before I hit the counter. Firm. Steady. Claire. My mother. I could barely breathe properly. She is alone. Damien's face hardened instantly into something cold enough to freeze the entire room. He pulled another phone from his pocket immediately. Marco. His voice turned razor calm. Send 2 teams to Queens now. I grabbed his sleeve before he could walk away. Please. The word came out smaller than I meant it to. Desperate. Damien looked down at my trembling hand gripping his arm, then back at my face. Something shifted behind his pale eyes. Protective. Possessive. Dangerous. Nobody touches your mother, he said quietly. Not while I am breathing. The drive to Queens felt unreal. Rain blurred across the SUV windows while Manhattan disappeared behind us in silver reflections and red brake lights. I sat beside Damien in complete silence, my hands clenched tightly in my lap hard enough to hurt. Every terrible possibility kept replaying inside my head. My mother alone in her apartment. Someone waiting outside her building. Someone watching her because of me. Because I walked down the wrong hallway. Damien remained calm beside me, speaking quietly into his phone every few minutes while his security team updated him through earpieces and encrypted calls I barely understood. The building is clear. One voice finally reported through the speaker. No sign of forced entry. I released a shaky breath too quickly. Damien glanced toward me immediately. Breathe slower. I am trying. No, his voice stayed low and steady. You are panicking. I looked away toward the rain streaking down the glass. You say that like it is unreasonable. Silence lingered for a second before he answered quietly. It is not unreasonable. Somehow that made my chest ache worse. The SUV pulled beside my apartment building 10 minutes later. Familiar brick walls. Flickering street lamp. The tiny deli across the street where my mother bought lottery tickets every Friday morning. Normal. Everything looked painfully normal. But two black vehicles already sat parked outside, while suited men watched the entrances carefully. Damien stepped out first before offering me his hand automatically. I stared at it for half a second before taking it anyway. Warm fingers closed around mine briefly, steadying me against the wet pavement. He released me immediately afterward like he realized he had done it without thinking. We moved quickly through the lobby and up the narrow apartment stairs. My pulse hammered louder with every step. Apartment 4B. The chipped blue paint on the door suddenly looked like the most important thing in the world. I unlocked it so fast my hand slipped twice. Mom. My voice cracked instantly. The kitchen light flicked on. Claire. Relief nearly dropped me to my knees. My mother stepped into the hallway wearing pink pajamas and reading glasses, confusion all over her tired face. What on earth is going on? I crossed the apartment in seconds and wrapped my arms around her so tightly she laughed softly in surprise. Honey, I cannot breathe. Tears burned painfully behind my eyes anyway. You are okay. Of course I am okay. She pulled back slightly and finally noticed Damien standing near the doorway behind me. Silence fell immediately. My mother blinked once. Twice. Claire, she whispered carefully. Who is the movie star standing in my apartment? I nearly choked on exhausted laughter for the first time in 24 hours. Damien looked mildly horrified by the question. Somehow that made him seem more human than anything else so far. Mom. No, seriously. She adjusted her glasses. That man looks expensive. One of Damien's guards failed to hide a cough that suspiciously sounded like laughter behind us. Damien himself looked down briefly before answering with calm politeness. Damien Moretti, ma'am. My mother smiled warmly like he was somebody's accountant instead of the most dangerous man I had ever met. Well, Damien Moretti, thank you for bringing my daughter home. Home. The word hit strangely hard. Because the truth was, I did not feel safe here anymore. Damien seemed to understand that instantly from the look in my eyes. My mother moved toward the kitchen to make coffee, still completely unaware of the storm surrounding us. I turned quietly toward Damien near the doorway. You should go, I whispered. His pale blue eyes stayed locked on mine. Do you want me to? The question caught me completely off guard. Outside, rain tapped softly against the apartment windows while Queens traffic hummed far below us. Normal life. My old life. But standing there looking at Damien beneath the dim kitchen light, I realized something terrifying. The hospital corridor was not the moment my life changed. It was the moment I stepped into his world and never fully stepped back out again. An exhausted pediatric nurse takes one wrong step inside a restricted Manhattan hospital corridor and accidentally enters the dangerous world of a powerful mafia boss who refuses to let her disappear afterward. What begins as fear slowly turns into emotional obsession as the ordinary nurse becomes trapped between survival, loyalty, and the cold protection of a man feared across New York City. This cinematic dark romance story blends luxury, danger, emotional tension, and slow burn attraction inside a rain-soaked underworld filled with secrets, private security, and forbidden connections. As threats close in around her family, the mafia boss makes one thing terrifyingly clear: nobody touches what belongs under his protection.